Hey y'all, Happy New Year. I know it's not technically the new year anymore, but it's the second week of January. That's just like the first. And really, this is the first week we get back to work. So, Happy New Year. Tonight I wanted to get on here and talk to you guys a little bit about my spiritual journey, about spirituality, how I feel about that, where I stand on that with myself and with others. I said I wanted to do it last year, but I never really got around to doing it in depth the way that I want to this year. So I thought also briefly about, should I separate my spiritual journey from my regular channel? Like, should I start a different channel? And the answer is no. And the reason why is because spirituality, my spiritual journey, informs my life now. It informs how I work. It informs my relationships with my friends and my family, and it informs the way that I treat myself. So that belongs on my regular channel. No separation needed. I wanted to start off with a little story time about my awakening, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my ancestors because the two go hand in hand. And actually, my relationship with my ancestors, me hearing from them, started way before I actually had the spiritual awakening. Like, it was a little crazy, but I think that it is something that I probably have in common with a lot of people. So let's get into it. Now, when it comes to ancestors, I started hearing from them probably, I'd say maybe 3 years ago, like at the very end or the very last quarter of 2021. I was finishing up a work contract. I was out of town, and I very briefly thought that I was losing my mind. I didn't hear voices, nothing like that. Sometimes it's actually like my own voice, but it's almost always like positive messages or just like a feeling in my stomach saying something, for lack of better description. And what I mean by that is, when I was at work, if I was working really hard that day, giving it my all, I would feel in the pit of my stomach or feel in my head like, good job, like you did a good job. And it made me feel good. It made me feel like something outside of me was watching over me. And I've always felt like I had relatives who passed away watching over me, but I never called them or considered them to be ancestors like we do in the spiritual community. So that started at work. But then when I got back home to my house, a lot of the messages, like the feelings or like things that I could understand that weren't necessarily words, started to get even stronger in my stomach. What I mean by that is, whenever I would have a night alone to myself, if I would have me a glass of wine or something like that, and I was in a really relaxed state, I used to listen to a lot of gospel music. I don't as much anymore, but back then I was on it heavy. And I would feel, not really feel like clean up first before you pray, or you need to clean up your house before you listen to the gospel music, or just like clean up before you relax. And when I did, it would be like, good job, like, all right, Ash. And I always was confused about whether or not that was just my inner me or if it was something else. It was definitely something else, and it was my ancestors. Mostly it was probably my family, like family lineage, ancestors, because all of them are like neat freaks. So it opened up the lines of communication a lot easier with them when my place was spick and span. And I'll be honest with you, when I'm stressed, it is not. So it's probably harder for them to talk to me even then when I was in a lot of mess. So when I would clean up and I would pray, I would always feel like I had positive presence with me. Like I was never scared in my house by myself. I was never scared going anywhere by myself. A lot of my best friends don't even live in town anymore. And for the past few years, I've never felt fearful. And it was because I always felt presence. And I know now for sure that was my ancestors, but they would start off the messages with either a good job or you could do better when it came to work, or clean up your house so, we can be there with you. Once I started to get receptive to the messages, and when I mean receptive, I mean I would respond by doing what the feeling told me to do. Like if the feeling told me to clean up and I did it, then the messages started ramping up. And it wasn't, again, like in the form of words or anything like that, but I mean, it was in the form of protection. And it began to be noticeable to me outside my house. For instance, if I was late somewhere, and this is at the end of 2021, if I was on my way to an event or to a party or to a date, if I would end up late or something, it'd be because I had narrowly missed a car accident or something like that. Or me losing something and having to go back to my house. It would be because I had just got a phone call that I needed to be by myself for. Things that I didn't know were synchronicities, like events that would fall into place in such a way that it would always work out for my good. When I think about synchronicities, I used to only think about the numbers like 333 or 777. That was what I thought synchronicity meant. No. Sometimes synchronicities mean like a chain events, chain of reactions that always seem to work good for me. But the way that I started to realize that it really was a force, like something was real, was protection for other people around me. And here's where I get into my story time about my ancestors. To make a long story short, I was in a relationship from like 2020 to the first quarter of 2021, I guess. It was a really unhealthy relationship, a really volatile relationship, a really passionate relationship. But nevertheless, we were together, and I realized now that my ancestors were protecting him as well as me. And probably when he was not even with me, he was protected. But I say the protection between us as well because since our relationship was so unhealthy, we got into it all the time. I have mellowed out quite a lot since then, but being the eldest daughter, I'm rarely one to back down in relationships with my significant other. I'm lying. I don't know. It was just an unhealthy relationship, put it like that. But it rarely ever got to a point where it was escalated. And I do believe that was because of my ancestors' intervention. Like, we would argue all the time, but it was almost like a cartoon in that you'd be so angry, you're at each other, but the anger always misses each other. Or the impact of the anger always misses each other. And that, I believe, was a buffer because of my ancestors, because they did not want me ending up in something so consequential that I would feel the effects of it after we were no longer together. I guess they knew that we weren't going to be together that long. I don't know. I want to fast forward, though, to back to 2021, the end of 2021, because not only did I start to feel messages from my ancestors more, I started to have a spiritual awakening, but I didn't realize what it was. Back then, I was a Southern Baptist Christian, very deeply into my gospel music. I believed that a lot of spirituality was the devil. In my ignorance, I believed the tarot cards were the devil. In my ignorance, I believed that channel messages and psychics versus prophets were the devil. It was a lot that I was very intolerant of. But while I was at work, away out of town, all the algorithms on my social media changed. And it was nothing that I had done, no picture that I had liked to make that happen. And the algorithm changed to strictly spiritual posts. It was so weird. I realize now that that's like part of a Claire, but I didn't know what it was then. And I didn't know how to change it. I ignored it for a little bit. But things started to get really interesting because some of the messages that I would scroll past would describe the guys that I was dating almost like to a T. And I'm like, what is this? What is going on? And then I gradually began to be like, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe it's not something to be as intolerant of as I was. So I still had a long way to go before I would actually get to receive those messages as any sort of truth that wasn't evil. But all of it came together really quickly. However, my ancestors have been there the whole time. What I've learned so far about ancestors and your ancestral lineage is that some of them, and probably a lot of them, are not even ones that you are related to. Sometimes they could be friends, family friends, people that watched over you, protected you, people that were in your lives from former lives and past lives. And yes, I do believe in that. But I will say this, looking back on when I was a very, well, in my idea, devout, I wasn't devout Christian, but when I was a deeply connected Christian and I believed that Jesus was on the main line most of the time, here's the thing. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, but I am going to say your ancestors are also on the main line, and when you speak to them, that is a direct line between you and the divine, because they are divine. So if you feel like you are not getting through to the ascended master that you worship or that you walk with, I would try speaking with your ancestors and really just speaking aloud. I am still very much a beginner at this, so sometimes I talk to them aloud, just casually, just as much, if not more, than when I do formally in ritual style, things of that nature. I would be lying if I sat up here and said to you that I go before an ancestral altar every single day and speak to them. But I do speak to them every single day. Because there's never a day where I have not felt that positive force around me ever since the end of 2021. So no, they don't have to be your family, especially if you come from like a really small family. That doesn't mean that your ancestral team is going to be really small. But the people that are protecting you are not always just of blood. It's really fascinating the deeper you get into it, and it's something that excites me. So because it does move me the way that it does, I'm ready to talk about it now.